Trump says the tariff war turned the United States into an A+++ economy. Strong growth, winning trade, China cornered. That is the story coming out of Washington. But when you strip away the slogans and look at the numbers from 2025, the picture flips fast. If not for the AI boom and massive tech spending, the US would already be flirting with recession. Tariffs were supposed to bring factories home and crush Chinese exports. Instead, they are squeezing American industry, raising costs, and exposing deep weaknesses at home. And once you follow where growth is really coming from, the tariff narrative starts to fall apart completely. The reality inside the US economy in 2025 looks very different from the victory lap coming out of Washington. Growth is narrow and fragile. Almost all of it is concentrated in just 4 areas: healthcare, real estate, government spending, and technology. Outside of those pockets, large parts of the economy are losing momentum fast. Construction activity is rolling over. Manufacturing output is shrinking. These are the sectors that actually build things, export goods, and create durable growth. And they are the ones absorbing the shock from tariffs. When tariffs raise the cost of key inputs, the damage spreads quickly. US manufacturers do not magically become more competitive. They face higher prices for components, materials, and machinery. Domestic suppliers raise their own prices to protect margins. Those costs are pushed forward through the supply chain. By the time the product reaches the consumer, affordability is gone. This is why bringing production home under tariffs does not translate into cheaper or more competitive goods. It produces inflation pressure and weaker demand instead. The idea was that tariffs would force a shift toward an export-based economy. That is not what is happening. What is keeping growth afloat is a combination of government spending and a massive technology surge driven by AI. Strip that out, and the underlying economy looks exposed. Outside of advanced chips tied to artificial intelligence, very little is selling at scale. This sets up the core contradiction of the tariff experiment. While Washington tried to weaponize the US consumer market and cut off Chinese imports, the global response moved in a very different direction. The latest trade data from 2025 completely shatters the idea that tariffs have boxed China in. Instead of collapsing, China's external position strengthened. Its trade surplus just hit a record $1.2 trillion, the largest ever. That alone tells you the decoupling story sold in Washington is deeply misleading. Even more striking is how this surplus was built. In December, overall Chinese exports rose by 6.6%, despite a sharp drop in shipments to the United States. Exports to the US fell by 30%, which was supposed to be the pressure point, but that decline was more than offset elsewhere. Europe bought more, Asia bought more, and the real standout was Africa, where Chinese exports surged by 26%. This is not an economy scrambling to replace lost demand. It is an economy that already redirected its supply chains and customer base long before the tariff war peaked. China didn't wait to see how Washington would act. It moved early and moved fast. This is what real decoupling looks like. China is no longer anchored to the US consumer. Its export machine is now spread across regions that are still growing, still building, and still sensitive to price. Chinese goods remain essential because they bring costs down at a time when inflation pressure is a global political problem. That creates a powerful form of leverage. The more China exports to the rest of the world, the harder it becomes for any US administration to isolate or sanction it without triggering blowback elsewhere. The tariff war was supposed to weaken China's position in global trade. Instead, it accelerated a shift that was already underway. By the end of 2025, China was exporting more broadly, relying less on the US, and locking in relationships that are much harder to unwind. And once you see where that demand is coming from, it becomes clear why so many governments are quietly adjusting their economic priorities. What followed the tariff shock surprised many policymakers. Instead of countries pulling away from China, more of them leaned in. The reason is simple: China exports deflation. At a time when inflation is politically toxic, Chinese goods help keep prices down. For governments trying to stabilize their economies, that matters more than ideology. The world still depends on Chinese manufacturing to control costs across everything from consumer goods to industrial inputs. This is why countries like France and Canada are actively engaging China, even as tensions with Washington rise. Leaders such as Macron and Carney understand the scale of what China offers. It is not just about cheap products. It is about access to rare earths, Chinese technology, and supply chains that are already built and hard to replace. Just as important is demand. China is no longer only a factory for the world. It is one of the largest consumer markets on the planet. Nowhere is this clearer than in e-commerce. China controls about 40% of global online sales, with a market worth roughly $3.4 trillion, nearly triple the size of the United States. For Western companies, walking away from that market is not a strategic option. They still need Chinese consumers to sustain growth, especially as demand weakens elsewhere. Selling planes, machinery, or luxury goods is one thing. Selling everyday consumer products at scale is where long-term revenue comes from, and China dominates that space. At the same time, the United States is importing less from the world. That reduces its leverage. While Washington tries to use access to its consumer market as a weapon, Beijing benefits from being embedded across global supply chains and end markets. The balance of power has shifted quietly but decisively. China is setting terms simply by being indispensable to both producers and consumers worldwide. Behind that leverage is capital. Chinese companies, both private and state-controlled, are sitting on large cash reserves and deploying them aggressively. In 2025, that money is flowing into basic materials, metals, and minerals. Mines, refineries, and processing assets are still being consolidated globally, locking in control over the physical supply chains that everything else depends on. And that shift is exactly what's driving Trump's increasingly strange rhetoric. As the data keeps piling up, the political response out of Washington has grown sharper and more defensive. The trade numbers from 2025 are hard to spin, yet the messaging has moved in the opposite direction. Tariffs are no longer framed as a risky experiment. They are presented as an unquestionable success. Anyone who challenges them is suddenly labeled as siding with China.
But it was in 1929, because a lot of people, the anti-tariff people. Now, an anti-tariff person is a pro-Chinese person, like Coke. The evidence shows overwhelmingly that the tariffs are not paid by American consumers, that they're paid by foreign nations and middlemen. And Scott went over that with us before, and they're paid by middlemen. They raise the thing. Countries get involved. They pay them because otherwise they won't have companies. They won't be viable. And we're the big beneficiary. Once again, the so-called experts were 100% wrong and Trump was right.
The argument coming from Trump is blunt. Tariffs are not paid by American consumers. They are paid by foreign nations and middlemen. The experts got it wrong. Trump got it right. This framing matters because it turns an economic policy debate into a loyalty test. Once that line is crossed, backing down becomes politically impossible. Admitting error would not just mean changing course. It would mean conceding that the entire tariff narrative collapsed under real-world data. That is the trap. A U-turn now would invite ridicule, both at home and abroad. So the policy stays in place, even as the consequences become harder to ignore. Every additional month of tariffs deepens the structural shifts already underway. China exports more to the rest of the world. It relies less on the U.S. market. Its trade surplus keeps expanding. The longer this continues, the less leverage Washington retains. This is why the rhetoric sounds increasingly absolute. There is no room for nuance, because nuance implies doubt, and doubt would raise an uncomfortable question. If tariffs are truly working, why does China's global position look stronger than ever? That contradiction does not stay contained to trade statistics. It spills directly into strategic industries, where the costs of stubborn policy choices rise much faster. Nowhere is that contradiction more dangerous than in the Chip War. The Chip War shows how the tariff strategy starts working against itself once you follow the money. The U.S. has imposed a 25% export tariff on NVIDIA's chip sales to China. That means NVIDIA must hand over 25% of its Chinese revenue directly to the U.S. government. For every $10 NVIDIA earns in China, $2.50 goes to Washington. This is framed as leverage. In reality, It pulls capital away from the one thing that actually keeps US chip makers ahead: scale-driven innovation. Advanced chip development is brutally expensive. NVIDIA's next-generation platforms, including the Blackwell and Rubin lines, depend on massive global sales to fund research, tooling, and iteration. Cutting off revenue from China, which represents about half of global semiconductor demand, weakens that engine. While US firms lose cash flow, Beijing is doing the opposite. Chinese chip makers are allowed to keep their revenue, and they receive heavy state subsidies on top of it. That difference compounds quickly. There are already reports of Beijing telling customs not to allow NVIDIA chips into China, putting the market into limbo. Even without a formal ban, uncertainty alone is enough to redirect buyers. Chinese firms are adapting fast. Huawei's Ascend chips are still weaker than NVIDIA's top products, but they are significantly cheaper. Cost efficiency matters. When chips are 3 times weaker, but also 3 times cheaper, companies can scale through volume while narrowing the performance gap over time. Quantity becomes a strategy, not a weakness. To justify the policy, the administration points to a massive push to relocate chip production.
There's 2 commitments from Taiwan. There's $250 billion that comes directly from companies, and then there's $250 billion supplied by the government to help their smaller and medium-sized companies and bring that whole supply chain to America. So we're going to bring it all over so we become self-sufficient in the capacity of building semiconductors. This is exactly what Donald Trump said he was going to do, and he is doing it today. $250 billion and $250 billion. This is the kind of scale that Donald Trump operates.
The plan sounds impressive on paper. $250 billion from companies and another $250 billion from the Taiwanese government to bring the full semiconductor supply chain to the United States. But building factories does not solve the demand problem. US chip sales will eventually saturate. Domestic buyers alone cannot absorb the output needed to sustain innovation at the frontier. Without access to global markets, especially China, costs rise and progress slows. And while Washington fights over who controls the most advanced chips, the conflict is already spilling into something far more physical. The next battlefield is metals. Silver has quietly become the most revealing battleground in this entire trade war. Prices have turned extremely unstable. We are seeing 5 to 10% moves in just days, the kind of volatility normally reserved for tech stocks or crypto. That alone tells you something is broken. The pressure is coming from both sides of the global economy at once. In Shanghai, silver prices are trading about $13 higher than the rest of the world. At the peak, buyers in China were paying a $15 premium per ounce. Once you factor in physical delivery and availability, the effective price inside China climbs toward $120 an ounce. That gap has created a massive arbitrage. Silver is flowing from west to east at scale. Traders are shipping it by any means possible because a $15 margin on a roughly $90 base price is too large to ignore. The metal is simply moving to where it is most valued. The reason sits at the heart of the energy transition. Demand from renewables and electric vehicles is exploding. China, as the world's largest manufacturer of solar panels, is feeling the pressure first. Just a few years ago, silver made up only 3% of the total cost of a solar panel. Today, it accounts for roughly 25%. That is a massive shift. Manufacturers are trapped. There is no easy substitute. Copper cannot replace silver without serious losses in efficiency, durability, and lifespan. Those trade-offs are not acceptable at scale. This is where the tariff strategy breaks down completely. Washington initially planned 20 to 30% tariffs on silver imports, but that idea was quietly shelved. Imports are already surging. A tariff would send US prices sharply higher, hit companies like Tesla, crush renewable projects, and punish consumers and investors at the same time. The policy is impossible to enforce without self-harm. Silver exposes the contradiction. The United States is trying to weaponize trade while remaining dependent on the very materials it cannot afford to restrict. And that dependence is not going away. Volatility is not fading. Policy uncertainty is now part of the market, and that pushes companies and investors to hoard, hedge, and move early. As long as tariffs remain unpredictable, the economic conflict between the United States and China will only intensify. This is no longer about trade balances. It is about control over demand, supply chains, and critical materials. So the real question is this: will Trump ever backtrack on tariffs? And can the U.S. actually afford to tariff silver at all? Share your view in the comments. If this breakdown helped, hit like and subscribe.